right, welcome back. It is now Nanny B story time. It is week 2, and so we are learning about the first of the 10 Commandments. And so let's review. I forgot to show y'all pictures last week, so I was going to show you. So God ends up calling Moses to Mount Sinai, and he tells the people to gather around, but do not come. He set boundaries to protect them, and gave Moses the 10 Commandments, and they were written on, let me flip it up the right way, and he's telling them how to live in order to have a wonderful, abundant life. And so that's what we're learning about today. So make sure you have your Bibles. That's the reason we get together, so we can find out what God says in his word and then try and live it in our lives. So God made the rules to help us to live longer and to live happier, because when we do the wrong things such as lie, steal, kill, hopefully that we don't do those, we have the guilt, the shame, the things that make us feel bad. And so God said, don't do these things, so then we can live happier lives. So look in 1 Kings, and the prophet Elijah is going to show that there is only one true God, and that is who we are to be worshiping and following. And so look at big number 18, and I'm going to hit and miss. It's not quite the whole chapter, so I'm going to hit some verses, skip some others so that we can get through this. So very first verse says, now it happened after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the face of the earth. Verse 2, so Elijah went and showed himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria. Now, background. Who is Ahab? He is the king. And he and his wife Jezebel was doing their own thing, not following God's commandments. They were actually worshiping false gods. Jezebel was like majorly wanting to make sure everybody did that. And she actually had started killing off God's prophets. And so a lot of them had to flee. Elijah at the time thinks he's the only one left. And so there had not been rain on the land for 3 years. And so there's no rain. The food is not growing. People are getting hungry. There's this famine because they did not follow God's command, king and queen. And so now jump all the way down to verse 17. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, is this you, the troubler of Israel? So he's blaming Elijah that there's not any rain, not realizing it's his own sin and worshiping false gods that is causing the famine. Verse 18, he said, I have not troubled Israel. This is Elijah speaking. But you and your father's house have, because you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and you have followed the Baals. Now, Baals, that was one of the false gods, all right? And so then he has a plan. Verse 19 that God has told him to do. Now then, send and gather to me all Israel, the whole country, at Mount Carmel, together with 450 prophets of Baal, that's one of the false gods, and 400 prophets of Asherah, that's another false god, who eat at Jezebel's table. So this Jezebel was had her own prophets for these false gods that said, and she like gave a banquet to them. So Elijah is saying to Ahab, the king and the queen, you get up your false gods and we're going to have a showdown. So look at verse 21. Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you hesitate between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal, follow him. But the people did not answer him a word. See, unfortunately, the children of Israel decided that I can worship this God, and I can worship this God, and I can worship this God, and then I'll be blessed because this God is over this and this God is over this. And then I'll make sure that my crops are growing and my kids are okay and everything's wonderful because I'll make sure that I serve all of them. There are many countries in the world today that do the same thing. They have many gods that they worship, trying to make sure that they all are happy so that they can in turn live a happy life. And Elijah's going, if there's only one true God, and I'm going to show you who that is, but if he's God, then that's who you need to follow. So the Israelites had just kind of continued to pack on, you know, serving all these different multiple gods. And at the same time, and Elijah said, we're done. Let's decide today who you're going to serve. Kind of like back when Joshua, choose today who you're going to serve. And so look at verse 24. And then you call on, so here's the deal. They say, we're going to build 2 altars. We're going to put a sacrifice on it. You're going to call for your gods to send fire for the offering. I'm going to ask God, the one true God, to send down fire for the offering. And we're going to see. So this was like this showdown. So verse 24 tells us, and then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people said, that's a good idea. So here's the contest. We're going to build 2 altars, put a sacrifice on it. Whichever God sends down fire, that's who is the one true God and where you need to worship. Can you imagine Elijah? I cannot imagine the thoughts of Elijah going, I mean, the faith and the trust that he had to have in God, because he now has an audience of thousands of people. And so he had to trust that, God, you're going to do this. You told me to do this in front of all of these people. And so look down at verse 26. Then they took the oxen, they being the prophets of Baal and Asherah, the false gods, not the true ones, they're the false ones. So they took the ox which was given them, and they prepared it, and they put it on the name of Baal. From morning to noon, they're calling out. So all morning long, oh, Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they leaped about the altar which they had made. They're making a commotion. They're trying to get their false god's attention. And they're not hearing anything. Verse 27, and it came about at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, call out with a louder voice, for he is a god. He is either occupied, being busy, or he's gone aside, or he's on a journey maybe, or perhaps he's asleep and you need to wake him. So they cried out with a louder voice. And so Elijah's going, okay, we've been doing this for hours. So maybe you need to yell a little louder. Maybe your false gods are sleeping, or maybe he took a vacation and you need to do something to get their attention, to realize that, hey, they need to show up for this. And again, there's nothing. And so when midday had passed, so remember this started in the morning till noon, and then Elijah starts telling them, well, maybe you need to yell a little louder. So now we're at midday. So this has been going on for 6 to 7 hours. They raved. This is verse 29. When midday was past, they raved until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice. But there was no voice, no one answered, and no one paid attention. So they are doing everything they can to get their false gods to pay attention and show up. And there's no answer. There's nothing. So look at verse 30. Then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. So all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Apparently, in all the hoopla of the false god prophets trying to get their God's attention, the Lord's altar had become shambles. So he rebuilds it. Verse 31. Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the sons of Israel. So we hear about the 12 tribes of Israel. So he took 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, Israel shall be your name. Verse 32. So with the stones, he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench around the altar large enough to hold 2 measures of seed. He basically makes this ditch around the altar, and you're going to find out why. Then he arranged the wood, and he cut the oxen in pieces and laid it, so he's prepared the sacrifice. Verse 34, and then he said, fill 4 pitchers of water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. Now, I don't know if y'all have ever done a campfire, but wood that's wet won't burn. We've tried, and we used to heat our house with a wood-burning stove, and we many times had wet wood, and it did not want to burn, which is very hard to get a fire to start. And here he is purposely wetting the sacrifice and the wood. And so then let's continue. And he said, do it a second time. So now we've got 8 pitchers of water on this. And then they did it a second time. And then he said, do it a third time. So, and they did it a third time. And so verse 35, and the water flowed around the altar and also filled the trench with water. So now he has prepared this altar, put the wood on it, put the sacrifice on it, poured 12 pitchers of water to where everything's now soaking wet, and it has got water kind of like it's been raining forever, and so all the puddles are full. That's kind of the way it was around this altar. Verse 36, at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are the God of Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all of these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back again. One simple prayer. Not hours and hours of yelling and screaming and jumping up and down like the false prophets did. He prays one simple prayer. Then look what happened in verse 38. So here, let me show you. This is where he went to Ahab. And then we find in verse 38, then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, the sacrifice, the wood, the wet wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. So not only did he just send fire and start a little campfire. No, that's not our God. Our one true God sent down fire. It consumed the ox. That was the sacrifice. It consumed every bit of wood. It consumed the rocks, which blows my mind because we have rocks around our fire pit. And the fact that fire could just turn those to dust, and then all the water that was around in the ditch is gone. It's all consumed by this fire. One simple prayer prayed by Elijah, and God showed that he is the one true God. Verse 38, when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. They knew, they saw. We can see, we weren't there, but we can know from his word that is always true, that he is the one true God. And he showed that day. Showed King Ahab. He showed Jezebel, the queen. He showed all those prophets, the 900 and something, and all the children of Israel there, that this is the same God that led you out of Egypt, that parted the Red Sea, that did all those plagues on the Egyptians when you were in slavery in Egypt. This is the same God. You have forgotten. You have stopped worshiping me. You have decided to worship these other gods too. And I'm going to tell you, no. I am the one true God, and I am the only one to be worshiped. And so that's what he did that day on Mount Carmel when Elijah prayed a simple prayer. And so a lot of times people go, oh, the 10 Commandments. Here, I'll show you the 10 Commandments. Oh, that's just Old Testament. We don't need to worry about that. But what I want to show you is in the book of Deuteronomy, a couple of books over from where the 10 Commandments are. It's still considered the law. It gets more detailed. And so in Deuteronomy 6, verse 5, Deuteronomy is that big name. It's the 5th book of the Bible. Funky name. And it says, big number 6, little number 5. You can go back and look. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. So this is one of God's commandments that tie into this first commandment, that we are to follow the Lord only. Now, what does Jesus have to say about that? So in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's the 4 Gospels. It tells of Jesus' time here on earth. And in Matthew, we're going to see, and 3 of the 4 Gospels tell us what Jesus said. Luke 22, verse 37, and he, being Jesus, said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. So Jesus is telling, it may be in the Old Testament, but it's still true today. Matthew, then look at in Mark. Let me flip over to it. Big number 12, chapter 12, little number 30 says, well, let's back up 29 so you can know who is saying this. Jesus answered, the foremost is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. So again, Jesus, again, and Mark is telling us the first commandment we still need to be doing and still need to be living. Luke chapter 10, verse 27. And he, being Jesus, answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. So here's where he takes the 10 commandments, and we're going to see he puts it into 2. And so just because it's in the Old Testament does not mean that, oh, you know, we don't have to worry about that anymore, because Jesus is telling us the first commandment. I've said in multiple books, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you still need to do. We have one God, one true God, and that is who we need to follow. That is who we need to serve. That is who we need to worship. So we will get into commandment number 2 later. So if you have your packet, you have a couple of, we can kind of do this one together. So it says, because we're following God, because that's the first commandment. He's the one true God. Circle the right words to complete each sentence. So first, King Ahab followed the Lord or a false god. So which did he do? Yes, he followed a false god, which is why it hadn't been raining and they have a famine going on. Elijah told the people to ignore or to choose the true God. So we have the prophet Elijah. Well, a prophet is a spokesman for God. He has a message. He's telling the message of God. And he told them to choose the one true God. Someone or no one answered the prophets of Baal. So they're hooping and hollering and jumping up and down and doing and shouting from morning till night. And who answered? No one. Because they don't exist. They're not real. Okay, God ignored or God answered Elijah's prayer. Elijah prayed one simple prayer, and God answered it. He sent down fire. He consumed everything, the altar, the wood, the water, the stones, the sacrifice, to show the people who he was and who he is, because God doesn't change. So the same God who did that in 1 Kings is the same God that we worship today. And so on your other sheet, loving God, the greatest commandment, Matthew 22, you can read that. And so you can do that sheet on your own. I'm going to come back with a new missionary story. I hope y'all enjoyed Hudson Taylor last week. I'm going to do better at getting them the 5 days done. And so come back. We'll have our missionary story. It's going to take place in Fiji. And so you may need to get a map and figure out where that is, or I'll go and get a globe and show you where it's at. How's about that? So we'll be back in a little bit with the missionary story for day 1. And I'll see you then. Bye.